Okay, Levinas, part two. um, all right, so now we're really going to get into the meat, right? We did a little detour where Levinas was, talking a bit last time, first time and last time, where Levinas is talking about the possibility of mending, right, the relationship with God, the possibility of reconnecting to this enigmatic God, the possibility perhaps of, allowing ourselves to be wooed by God, right? So we talked about that last time, how God is shy, and so he reveals himself bit by bit, through a cloud of confusion, right? But little by little, as we consent, right, we have a clearer and clearer vision. So this path, remember last time I said this is a path Levinas will not take, right? And one of the reasons I cited was the Holocaust, right? This was this refusal in Levinas to be comforted, right? He realized, if only I could, right, pour out my heart, like, the painting that he saw in the church of Hannah, right, who is weeping over her lost children, right, the children she didn't have. And he was tempted. There was something drawing him to that painting. There was a longing perhaps in him to break open his heart and pour out his sorrow, but he turns around and leaves, right? He in a way is refusing to be comforted, right? Refusing to reconnect to this God. Even if this God is shy and, tactful, he is opting out, right? So Levinas is actually going to choose a different path. And we're going to see that this is, he's going to look for God elsewhere, right? He's going to stop looking to the heavens. After the Holocaust, the heavens were declared empty anyways, right? We had been looking to the heavens the whole time and nothing happens. So he turns away from the heavens, right? Where God is supposed to be living, this magnificent, powerful God on a throne, supposed to be comforting us, helping us, delivering us. He shifts his gaze, right? Away from the heavens, and he shifts it to a very unlikely place. He shifts it down to the places of the earth where the lowly and the wretched dwell, right? So he decides that God is no more in heaven. Not he decides, but he is unable to reconnect with this heavenly God, right? But he realizes I can still find, if I am to just look down, if I am to just dwell in the earth without looking up, right? If I abandon this idea of a God in the heavens, if I just come back to earth, right? Something that Nietzsche would appreciate, by the way, right? Nietzsche would be like, good one, Levinas, good job, right? If I just come back to earth and look around, I can still see God, right? And this unusual place where Levinas finds God after the Holocaust, refusing to look up, this new unusual place where he finds God is in the face of the human being, right? In other words, for Levinas, it's not that human beings are God, but I'm writing it down, human beings are what he calls the trace of God. So let's talk a little bit about this concept of trace, which we find throughout the text, right? You should have seen that word, the trace. Okay, what's a trace? It's the equivalent of leaving a trace. Or for example, right, you're on a beach and someone has walked there and now you see the footsteps, right? These are traces. Okay, so what does it mean that we as human beings are the trace of God, right? Okay, see a few of you trying to answer. So yes, you're defining trace very well, but who wants to be bold and tell me what does it mean then that a human being is the trace or the footstep of God or the imprint of God? What does it mean? Does anyone have the courage to explain to us? So Wilkes, go ahead. Explain a little bit what you mean by the image of God.
It's like, it's not saying that humans like are God. It's just saying that God is within us all. And when we all look at each other, we recognize each other's suffering because that's what we all share together. We share God and the human experience.
Okay, so how do you know that we contain God? We're going to talk about that, but I'm curious if you have any answer to that. How do you know that another human being contains the image of God. Let's see. Okay, Suresh, not bad. Oh, Subhan Kulova, you're on the right track. Let me hear from Suresh and Subhan Kulova.
All our studies so far with all the different philosophers at different times, like from Job, we learned humility. From Maimonides, we studied the mind. Rumi was with the heart. It's those simple aspects from those philosophers that they have tried to reveal to everybody else in their respective times that shows that there is God in all of us.
Okay,
So, yeah.
all right, very good, right? So you have this notion, right? There are certain qualities in the human being, right? Which are, we're going to talk about this, which are more than human, right? And so this points to the fact that we have something in us which is more than just our humanity, right? Very good. Subhan Kulova, did you want to add?
Yeah, so God is supposed to protect us, right? And in the introduction, you said we should feel responsible for another being. So as in, that's like, there's God within us.
Okay, so in a way, we are like God. The same way that God is responsible, we are also reflecting that. Okay, so you're pretty close to Levinas. We're going to see how he argues for it, right? Because it's easy to say, we carry the trace of God, right? So in other words, God, there is a hint, or we can get a glimpse, right? To say that we carry the trace of God is that God can be glimpsed, right? In us, right? In human beings. There is something in us, right? That is divine or that points to God, right? And so we have to see now whether Levinas is right in saying this, right? So of course, if you come from a biblical background, right, or a religious background, we are created in God's image, we are divine. But remember, Levinas is talking to a secular audience, right? And to a secular audience which despises religion. He's talking to a bunch of Nietzscheans, right? So you can't go around telling Nietzsche, "Ooh, we carry the trace of God," right? Nietzsche is gonna be like, in your dreams, you carry the trace of God, right? So he has to actually make an argument for that, and he does, right? Not in this text, but in other texts. So I'm gonna actually give you his arguments, and then we'll see the consequences of this new perspective on God, right? But let's look a little bit at how Levinas argues for this. I'm going to give you two arguments that you can find in other texts, right? The first one is the argument from torture, and the second one is the argument from compassion. And by the way, I want to see these arguments in your test answer, right? When you talk about Levinas and you start talking about the trace of God, if the question requires it to, I want to hear those two arguments. So listen very carefully. Okay. So Levinas is actually talking about moments in his experience, right, during the war, where he witnessed in another human being the trace of God, right? He sensed, right, there was a moment where there was a flash, right, a brilliance, where all of a sudden the human being, right, the veil comes, how do you say that? The veil is drawn, right? And you got a glimpse of something profoundly divine in the other human being, right? So make sure that you write this down, right? These are two experiences he had where he had a moment of insight into human nature, which for him was much more profound than, any understanding of humanity, right? In other words, he witnessed two moments in the torture and the compassion, which showed him that there's something in our humanity which is divine. Okay, let me write this down, right? He glimpses, right, in these two experiences, something in our humanity, right, which is divine. So we're going to see how that works. Okay, so starting with the argument from torture. So he, for sure, right, as a prisoner of war, several years, right, in the camp, he would have witnessed, right, scenes of torture. And so what he notices, right, and if you study, right, if you study, of course, hopefully none of you will experience it, right, or witness it worse, right? But just looking into the phenomenon of torture, right, the person who is torturing, are they looking to kill you? What are they trying to kill, right? This is what we have to see. It's an act of violence, right? And let's not think about torture as a way to get information, right? Just sadistic torture for the sake of torture, right? What are they trying to kill? Are they trying to kill the body? You guys are already answering my question, but let me get there slowly, right? When the torturer is, abusing you, are they trying to kill you physically? Yes or no? No, right? Otherwise they would just kill you, shoot you. But they seem to be trying to get to something else, right? What are they trying to get at? You want to kill me, right? So what are they trying to get to, right? And so the argument can be made that they're trying to get to something deeper that they are having clearly trouble destroying, because the torture has to be repeated several days, several weeks, and they are always losing. Why they have to redo it? Because clearly they haven't succeeded. Do you see what I'm saying? Let me check your faces, right? Do you see what I'm saying in the act of torture? Why they repeat and repeat and repeat? Because clearly they fail at reaching this thing they want to control and destroy. They are not able to destroy it, so they continue day after day. And this is, of course, what Levinas says. There's something. What the torturer is sensing is that there is something that they are trying to destroy that they cannot destroy. Right? Anytime you torture a human being, even if he's crawling in front of you, even if they write what you want them to write or say what you want them to say, you will always sense in that person something resisting you, right? Even if they tell you what you want to know, right? Or say nothing at all, right? Or even if they die under the torture, you will always sense that there was something in that human being that escaped you. And that's what reveals this moment. At that moment, when you realize that you cannot control that part of the human being. Yeah, I can destroy your body, but somehow your soul is escaping me. That's what's going on, right? Let me write it down, right? The torturer can destroy the body, but somehow he's aware that the soul or the spirit of the person continues, right, to escape him. This is what Levinas is seeing at that moment and calling the trace of God. It's that part in us which cannot be destroyed. That's what he calls this moment, right, where you see God, right? This is a part of us which no human being can touch, can destroy, can possess, can master. And this is the part of us which Levinas calls the divine part, right? And so this is very profound information, right? Because anytime you go through some kind of abuse, you can remember this, right? People who overcome abuse like rape, right? Or any type, right? Yes, you've been completely overtaken, right, by another human being, but nevertheless, right, something in you endures that they didn't touch. And from that point on, you can rebuild your life, right? This is a way to help survivors, right? Help them to realize that part of them was not touched. And from that part, they can heal and rebuild their lives, right? So that's what Levinas is sensing here in the torture, that yes, the human being can completely overtake the body, right? But something will always remain that is out of their reach. And that thing, Levinas calls the trace of God, right? Okay, Wilkes, why don't you ask your question? Go ahead.
I was just curious if this example was specific to like physical abuse or like just all suffering in general, including like emotional.
Yeah, any violence, right? Whether it's physical or emotional or even spiritual, any violence is an attempt to control you, to destroy you, to possess you, right? But what Levinas is seeing is that even any attempt, even if they take over your body, they still cannot reach that part of you. And we have to be aware of that to be able to heal from it, right? So yes, any type of abuse or violence, right? Always part of you remains untouched. And this is why the torturer goes crazy, right? We see that they become more and more sadistic. They go crazy. They become frenetic because they're sensing, I cannot get this thing, right? Over and over again, I'm trying to get to this thing, but it's always escaping. right? And that's what Levinas is witnessing, and he's seeing there at that moment a revelation of the divine in us, right? A revelation of this trace of God in us. Alim, please ask your question. It's a good question.
Yeah, so it's kind of dark, but then I was thinking, like, if there's like this part of us that like can't be taken away, like this will to like fight, like this like spirit to fight, like if the person takes their own life, like what does that mean in that context? Like do like they recognize that they don't have this spirit anymore, or like is that spirit lost but still there? So
very good, right? So suicide, right? I think Camus, who is a French author, wrote on it a lot, right? Because he himself almost committed suicide, right? Albert Camus, which you know, of course, you mentioned it before, right? He talks about it, and he talks about suicide as actually an act of rebellion, right? So even in suicide, it's something in you which is rising up above all of the abuse and which is saying, I'm done with this and I'm walking out, right? So we can even see, even though it seems like a defeat, for Albert Camus, suicide is the ultimate act of survival, right? It's the ultimate act where you say, everything has been destroyed, but I still get to choose if I die or not, right? So it's ambiguous. On the one hand, you could say, yes, now we have succumbed. Everything, we've lost hope, the spirit is dead. But at the same time, there's something in suicide where the spirit is very powerful, because the spirit is saying, we're choosing, right, to live or die. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's ambiguous. Camus actually sees suicide as an act of rebellion, right? Which is for him still incomplete, right? It's not the ultimate act of rebellion, because for Camus, living is the ultimate act of rebellion, right? Living in spite of the absurdity, in spite of the pain, in spite of the darkness, you choose to live. That's the ultimate act of rebellion. But suicide is a kind of rebellion. So the spirit, in a way, is alive and well, right? There's something still there. The moment you choose to do this act, right? So in that sense, right? The only type of death where the spirit is overcome is the kind of drug-induced death, right? The overdose, where you are so into the drug that your spirit fades and fades and fades, and then there's nothing left. So this is the only place where the trace of God is in danger, right? Because it's chemically altered. But if you're not in the chemical, right, you always have, right, especially if you choose to endure your pain without chemicals, that trace of God always remains. This is the danger of chemicals, right, of drugs, right? Because in a way, they are hitting exactly at that point, right, which is the point which normally cannot be overtaken. Chemically it can, right? But when it comes to any type of other experience, right, you can still resist, right, in that sense. So yeah, hope that answered a little bit your question. Okay, any questions on this issue of torture and the part of us which resists, and therefore there's something in us which cannot be overpowered, right? And the Levinas is seeing there, this thing which cannot be overpowered, that is the trace of God. Any questions on this one? If you have questions, it means the whole class has a question. So feel free to ask your question. Probably means nobody else understood. Everybody clear? Put your hand on the screen if you understood what I was saying. Okay, great. All right, let's go to the second argument. This is the argument from compassion. It's a twist on what Subon Kulova was saying, right? So this is another experience that Levinas witnessed in the camp, right, in the war camp. He witnessed situations, right, where people were able to rise above their instinct of survival, right, which is a natural instinct, right? This is something which is, all of us have it, right? But some people were able, for example, you would have a young man, right, who is, the bread was very limited, the food was very limited. If you stopped eating, you would die, right? It was barely enough to stay alive. And he would notice people sharing, not even sharing, but giving their portion to somebody who was not even their family. They didn't have any contact with them. It was just pure compassion. They see someone who's looking more and more like a skeleton, and they see they're weaker than them. So they might be elderly, they might be a child, and they give their portion, thereby putting their own life on the line, right? And Levinas at that moment is seeing an act which is supernatural. It's not natural to do that. It's not natural to take your own sustenance unless you're a mother, right? When it's instinctual. But if you're not a mother, if this is a total stranger, there's no instinct there, right? The only instinct that exists is me when I'm surrounded by strangers, right? So he would witness these strange, extraordinary scenes of, you know, sacrificing myself for the other that I don't know, right? And so Levinas is seeing there, what are you seeing? Why are you giving your bread to someone who is a complete stranger? What are you seeing in that person that is propelling you to give your bread to them, right? And Levinas is saying that in a way, what you're seeing in that person is something so precious and worth saving that you're willing to put your life on the line, right? You're seeing not their humanity, you're seeing their divinity, right? That's what's making you do that. In other words, something in the other person is commanding you. You feel, I have to do this, right? And you feel like I'm a complete jerk if I don't do this. I feel like I really have to do this. It's as though the other person is commanding you. And how can they have that power if they were not carrying the trace of God, right? So in other words, you're sensing in the other person, the person who is needing you right now, and in a way beckoning you to help them, you're seeing something holy in them, something sacred that you have to save. At that moment, you're glimpsing in that poor, desolate being the trace of God. Is that one clear? That one's a little harder. No, these two examples are from different texts, right? I'm simply, in the text, he only talks about how we are the trace of God, but it doesn't explain. So I'm drawing on other texts to explain what he means, right? So no quotes for those two examples, right? Okay, everybody's seeing what I'm saying, right? So in the act of compassion, what is moving you to compassion? It's not survival, it's not instinct. And Levinas is saying, well, it's because you have become aware of something profoundly holy in that person. There is something of infinite value in that person that you are seeing right now. That's why you're giving them bread. And that thing of infinite value, which is more important even than your survival, is the trace of God, right? Okay, see a couple hands. So Liang and then Milgram.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. So what you were saying was making sense, but at the same time, I had a question where, how would you see God in a stranger? Like, if you don't know them, are you saying like you see God in yourself, which made you want to give them bread because they're hungry? Or are you looking at them and somehow you see God, but you don't know them, but like, how would you see God in a complete stranger?
Very good. Let me explain. So you're sitting, right? Imagine yourself in the prison camp, right? You just got your bread. And next to you is a wretched being, right? Who looks so desolate. And then you feel in you compelled to give to them. Do you follow me, Liang? You're compelled to give. You feel it. I should give them bread. Do you feel that?
Like not all of your bread, but a little bit of bread.
Yeah. Okay, Liang. We'll start there. Very good. Something in you moves you. Something in them moves you to give bread. Now, what has that kind of power to move you out of your own instinct of survival? That's very powerful, right? What are you seeing in them that is worth your survival? And Levinas is saying, clearly you're having a revelation of something infinitely valuable in that person that you want to help them. That's the trace of God. Am I clearer now, Liam?
So like less about it is about the individual, but not so much when it comes to the decision. It's more about like feeling that divine presence and acting accordingly on that, right?
Yeah,
is that what you're saying?
Exactly. You feel compelled to give, even though you would feel that anywhere. Even if it's a dog, you feel it, right?
Mm-hmm. Right,
that's
exactly.
another story. But so even if it's a stranger, you feel it. And so why are you feeling, why is so important? If it was a flower, you wouldn't give your bread to the flower, right? Flower doesn't have that power over you.
I'll give it some water.
Okay. That's a good one. But you wouldn't give your water for survival to the flower, would you?
I mean, it depends on the flower. If it's
Oh, Liam, you're an aesthete. You're an artist. You need the beauty. But that's the
yeah,
you're
I
sensing
got you.
something
Yeah.
which is even more powerful than your own survival. What are you seeing? You're clearly having some kind of epiphany. What are you seeing? Levinas is saying you're seeing there something profoundly holy, something infinite value. That's the trace of God. Are we good, Liam?
We're good. Yep.
And I love the way that you might even see that in a flower. That's very beautiful. Levinas would disagree, but I like it.
Okay.
Okay, great. There was Milgram. Milgram, go ahead.
I realize my question doesn't really make any sense, but thank you.
Okay. You're good? No more question?
Yeah, no, I don't have a question anymore. Thank you.
All right, good. So, okay, so hopefully, all right, let me check if everyone understood the second one. How many of you understood the argument from compassion? But who needs some clarification? Nobody? Okay, good. All right, so basically so that's kind of the argument he gives, right? Obviously, again, with somebody like Levinas, this is not science, right? Where you can have the molecules of the trace of God and you can see them under a microscope, right? Levinas is saying, I am witnessing something powerful, and for me, there is no other explanation possible than there might be something here that we can call the trace of God, right? So of course, he's not saying this is 100% scientific, right? He's simply saying one way that the best explanation I can come up with is that they're seeing something which is more human, suprahuman, right? Superhuman, not super, right? Something profound is happening there that is beyond mere humanity, right? And that's what he calls God. So clearly we're not talking about here, a personal God on a throne. We're talking about a divine dimension, which is found in our humanity, right? This is something, by the way, that Nietzsche would be happy with. This is not something up there in the sky. This is in us. There's something which transcends mere instinct, mere humanity, our mere body, right? In other words, what he's saying is that there's something in our humanity which is more than the body, because the torturer can destroy the body, but there's something else he cannot destroy. What is that, right? Same thing. You care for your body, and yet you would sacrifice your body for that person. What is making you do that? Clearly, we are two-dimensional. That's what he's saying, right? Or clearly, or it seems that we are made of a deeper dimension than just the body. And that deeper dimension, he says, this is the divine in us. This is spirit. This is the trace of God, right? So he's simply saying this is a possible explanation. He's not saying this is the explanation because it's not science, right? He's saying this is how I would explain it. But remember, when he talks about God, it's not Jesus on the cross. It's not some God on a throne, right? This is a divine dimension, something which God for Levinas is anything that is beyond our mere humanity, anything that is beyond instinct, anything that is beyond matter or body. This is something deeper, right? Kind of like Marcel, right? There's a deeper dimension that Levinas is sensing in our humanity, and that's what he calls the trace of God. There's a deeper dimension which is beyond instinct, beyond survival, beyond our body. That's the trace of God, right? And he witnesses this dimension twice, once in torture, second in compassion, right? Okay, so again, it's not science. You can disagree on his interpretation of the experience, but you have to admit that there is something going on in that experience, right? And you can, of course, explain it differently. This is how Levinas chooses to explain it, right? So what we're realizing here, now going into the consequences, right? Into this new vision of God that Levinas is giving us right now, is that we are moving from a vertical religion to a horizontal religion, right? Let me write this down. We're shifting from vertical relationship with God, right, to a horizontal relationship with God, right? In other words, God is no more up there and I communicate and I receive comfort and I receive help, right? That's gone. That dimension has been broken after the Holocaust, right? Many people like Levinas could not do it anymore. believe in, whether maybe they stopped believing or they chose not to believe, right? Levinas chose. He might have believed it's still possible, but he chose to turn his back. And many Holocaust survivors made the same decision. We cannot be in this kind of relationship anymore because there has been such a betrayal, because our family, the other victims, were not comforted, right? So he shifts and now finds God among the wretched of the earth, among the oppressed. This is the new face of God, right? It's no more the thundering face, right, with trumpets and, you know, on the mountain, right, on Mount Sinai. This is now the weak, fragile face of a human being, which is dying, right, who is dying. That is where he now chooses to see God, right? And God is there too. In fact, in the Jewish tradition, right, you have a beautiful story. I don't know if I told you this. Maybe I did. Did I tell you the story of where the Messiah will be found when we, at the end of times? No? Okay. So what is the Messiah? Let's first define our terms. So this is a story from the Talmud, which is, remember, the commentaries on the Bible by the rabbis. And they have a story which says that the Messiah, so the Messiah is actually supposed to be a redeemer, right? The redeemer of I don't know, you know, there's many different ways to see that, but the redeemer of the world, right? This is a redeeming figure which is supposed to save the Hebrews, the Jews, right, from oppression. It's a very powerful, almost divine figure, right? So this is the Messiah. So the story goes that the Messiah, this powerful redeemer, when he arrives, will not be found in the temple, will not be found in the palace. He will be found outside of the walls of Jerusalem, among the lepers. What's a leper? Can anyone tell me? Those biblical people who are the ones who are versed in biblical literature, who can tell me what is a leper? Or if you're doing pre-med, you might know. Seriously, no one knows what is a leper? Let me look at your faces. No? Okay, a leper is someone who is yes, very good, Critchell, right? It's a very destructive skin disease which eats away at your flesh. Basically, you're eaten away by the disease, right? So they were deemed highly contagious and they were not allowed inside the city. So they would live outside of the walls of Jerusalem and other cities. So the Talmud says, right, when the Messiah comes, he will not be found in the palace or in the temple. He will be found outside of Jerusalem among the lepers, right? If you're looking for him, that's where he is. This is a powerful story, right? Which is in a way telling us, you want to find God? Don't look in the palace. Don't look in the temple. Go to the oppressed. This is where he is residing. You want to encounter God? Go find the oppressed, and there you will find God, right? You have a similar idea, of course, in Christianity, right? When Jesus says, if you help any of these people that need help, it's like you're helping me, right? So anytime you feed somebody, or you take care of an orphan, or you take care of a widow, right, you are taking care of God, right? So you have this idea in Christianity too. Anything in Islam that sounds like this? Anybody knows? Where are my Muslims? Is there anything in Islam which says something similar to that, that God is found among the poor and not among the powerful? I'll let you think about it. But certainly in both Judaism and Christianity, you already have this idea, and Levinas is kind of now articulating this in philosophical language, right? You want to connect to transcendence, you want to connect to something bigger than you, learn to transcend yourself, right, towards another human being. Let's see. Oh, Aladdin, really? Alim, tell us.
Yeah, because like the person who's like supposed to like open like the treasures is like located amongst like the poor instead of being like a king or like princess or whatever.
Okay, very good, right? Absolutely. So that would be kind of in the folklore, right, of the Arab world. You have this, by the way, it struck me in Hinduism. Wait, not Hindu, both. Somebody help me, but the Buddha, right? No, not Buddha, Krishna. This is Hinduism. Sorry, I'm becoming stupid. Okay. Krishna, right? If you're familiar with the figure of Krishna, I once went to a temple and I noticed that Krishna was blue. Anybody notice this? He's painted blue. Do you see what I'm saying? Yep. Okay, good. So I asked, I was like, why is he blue? And they told me, well, actually, he was known to be dark-skinned. So kind of coming from the poor region, right? And so now they paint him blue, of course, because he's, you know, divine. But he actually was thought to be, or used to be in person, very dark-skinned, which made him part of the inferior caste, right? And so it's interesting, right? That Krishna actually kind of like God, right? Coming from the low regions. Same idea, perhaps, in Hinduism too, right? So this is kind of a very powerful shift that Levinas is asking us to make. Instead of seeing God as this powerful being in charge of everything, supposed to protect us, we can see him as someone who is himself suffering and in need of us, right? This is a difficult shift if you're not used to it, right? So let me write this down, right? The shift that Levinas is inviting us to make, right, is to, rather than see God as powerful, right, we are invited to see him as powerless, right? By which I mean, of course, as needing us, right? Rather than us needing him, he is in need of us, right? Through the face of the other person, right? So that's the idea. Instead of God being the savior, the redeemer, powerful entity, we actually realize that no, God is humble, God is needy, God is poor, right? By the way, the Orthodox Church, Christian Orthodox, if any of you are Greek or Russian, right? They say something like this, right? God is humble. He is walking in the low places of the earth, right? Wilkes, you had a comment to make. Go ahead.
Yeah, I understand that idea that you're saying, and like, I know it's important to have like a conversation with God or like a relationship with God rather than be scared of him. But like, I just don't know how, I guess it must be difficult to go through that shift, like even personally, because, you know, when you have always viewed God as something superior, like I just can't like, you know, imagine us on that same level. Like it just doesn't, you know.
Okay, good. No, let me clarify. Very good question. He's not saying that God is the oppressed. He's saying God is glimpsed in the oppressed. In other words, God is calling us, beckoning us, commanding us in the face of the oppressed. Remember, the great transcendent God on Mount Sinai is a commanding God. So there's not that much difference. Instead of commanding from a mountain, he's now commanding you from the face of the oppressed. So he's not saying the oppressed is God. No, because some oppressed, to be honest, they're dreadful. They have terrible personalities and they will spit on you when you try to help them. I'm sure you've had some experience with that, right? So no, but he's saying, if you want to connect to God, the trace of God, the beckoning of God, the calling of God is in the face of the oppressed. Does that help a little more, Wilkes?
Yeah.
It's very simple. You're familiar with the words of Jesus. When Jesus says, when you help the oppressed, you're helping me, is he saying that I am the oppressed? He's not reducing himself to the oppressed. He's saying that's one way that you can minister to me, that you can serve me, is to serve the oppressed, right? This is a way that we give back to God, right? By serving the oppressed in a way, because we are here serving the oppressed, and because the oppressed is containing the trace of God, in a way we are serving God. Are we good, Wilkes?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, so this is the shift that Levinas is making, right? From a powerful God, omnipotent, omniscient, that we are used to having. He's saying, no, God is humble. God is poor. God is destitute. Instead of us needing God, God needs us. Instead of us receiving comfort from God, we are now called to comfort God, right? So this is what Levinas says is the shift from religiosity to responsibility, right? Right? It is no more about, piety and, here I am praising God, doing all the right things. No, the new religion is ethics, right? This is what he's proposing, right? This is a new religion he's proposing, which is in fact ethics. He's saying this is and we have to understand, right, that for Levinas, as a Holocaust survivor, this is the only way back, right? He can't do the other church things or synagogue things. Something has died in him. Something has broken, right? Something has snapped. This for him is the only path back, right, to God. This is the only path that he feels he can do and still remain faithful to his family, right, who died in the Holocaust. And so for him, this is the only way to reconnect, right? This is no more a God who comforts. Remember, he refuses that, but it is a God who is in need of being comforted, right? And so now to the $1 million question, where was God during the Holocaust? What can we answer? Where was God? What do we say among the Jews? Yes, okay, Christian. Yes. Yeah, God was always among the oppressed, right? And in a way, we missed him, right? Shamalov, please share with us your troubles.
I just feel that I don't think that God was only amongst the Jews. I feel like he was amongst everyone, and everyone had their way of utilizing him in that hard time. So it depends how you look at it.
I think what Kritchell was trying to say is that, I hope so, is that God was among the oppressed or the victims. Is that what you're trying to say, Shamalo?
Okay, so maybe if he's saying that, then like the Jews weren't the only ones oppressed.
Yeah.
There's many other people. So
yes, absolutely, right. I'm sure Kritchell is meant that, right, Kritchell? Yes, he says yes. Okay, very good. Leon, go ahead.
I had a quick question. You before you said that Levinas refused to I guess get comforted by God or something like that. But in a way, isn't he getting comforted by God because he's comforting others, he's helping other people, which in a way helps him out as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
But that's not from God, that's from himself, or? Well,
the goal is now to comfort the other, and in comforting the other, he finds comfort. Yes, right, but it's not from God.
Yeah, it comes from somewhere else.
Yeah,
within himself.
So it's fine to find comfort from someone you're helping, because at that moment you feel that you're honoring the victims. You are helping the victims. You're not ignoring the victims and being like, oh God, please, make me feel happy, right? No, you're really entering the history. You're not avoiding history. This is what Levinas is in a way criticizing, right? Those Christians and Jews who after the Holocaust act like nothing happened and go back to their prayers. Right? He's saying, no, the only way back, the only way forward is to find God now among the throng, among the people. And that's the way that I choose to have comfort. And this is my religion, and this is my piety, and this is my religious duty and ritual. He shifts the religion, right? But yeah, absolutely. There is a spiritual healing taking place. Absolutely. There is healing taking place. There is comfort taking place, but you are now, instead of avoiding the victim, you are engaging with the victim. And that feels a little more authentic to Levinas.
So he doesn't want to be like very dependent on God, but rather through his actions, then he can
Yeah, because for him, he's been betrayed, right? There's a betrayal. Dependent on someone who will not raise a finger, right? He realizes this kind of dependence is not, God is not there to intervene in history. We made a mistake to think of God like that, right? So he's saying, actually, no, we are actually called by God to help. This is how we are called to be responsible, not to be dependent. So he really shifts it. And Nietzsche, I think, would follow him. It's not that God calls us to be dependent. God calls us to be responsible. That's the mistake we made. We thought God called us to be little children, dependent, right? And Levinas is saying we need to outgrow that. We need to enter what he calls a religion for adults and not children, right? We were children for centuries with our hands outstretched to God. Now he's saying we need to grow up, and instead of stretching to God, we need to share with others. We need to shift from being dependent children to being responsible adults. He's realizing that they have gone in the wrong direction in being like this, right? We need to now realize that God actually always called us to be adults. Is that clearer, Leon?
Yeah, very clear.
Let's see if there's anything in the chat. Oh, okay, great. Thank you, Alim. Would you like to share? This is the Muslim point of view on Levinas.
Yeah, so like when like Muslims fast, like they try to like get rid of like all these like fancy stuff like food, and you like become closer to God by feeling and like feeling like you are poor, feeling like you have nothing. And maybe like that relates to the way that we were talking about before, like how you find God among the oppressed, and like there's like a huge practice of like modesty and like not wearing like flashy or like like buying things that are like super like flashy and like show off your money. So definitely like I didn't like it didn't come to mind before, but like I just like thought of it.
Yeah, I like it. Very good. Yes, that's just absolutely. By connecting to the poor, you're connecting to God, right? You're fasting, in a way, being solidary with the poor. And in that way, this is a spiritual practice, right, in Islam. So good. Okay, so we have some elements. I wouldn't be surprised, right? Because all of these are cousin religions, right? The Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are bound historically, right? So there should be connections, right? Wilkes, go ahead.
I have a question specifically, like, is it that materialism and like just material things, the material world, does that make you like further from God because of like greediness, or can you find like a balance? Like,
Yes.
I'm just curious about
Good
that.
question, right? So Levinas, obviously, when he says share your bread, this is a material gift, right? So that, I think, is what he's saying. He's saying the material needs to be, our relationship with the material world needs to be purified, right? When we are taking the material world, this is problematic. But when we are offering the material world, this is a purified connection to the material dimension. So of course he's not against the material dimension. This is very Hebrew, right? The Hebrews are very material, not materialistic. Let's not go there, right? They're very material. So when you offer bread to someone, this is material, but it's simply you are connecting to the material world on a different level. Does that make sense, Wilkes?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I keep, sometimes I forget about like the purification process, and my mind always says it's either this or that. So I just
No, the material, of course, is part of our humanity, right? But we need to learn how to navigate the material world, right? And when we just take, we are navigating it in a very childish way. But when we offer it, now we are really navigating the material world in a very dignified, noble way, right? That's the idea. Good. Okay, so let's see. So last thing, let's go now briefly. How would Nietzsche be convinced? This time I'll be a little clearer maybe than with Marcel, right? Actually, let me ask you. We have a couple minutes. How might Nietzsche like what Levinas has been saying? Let's see what you guys can come up with. So we know he wouldn't agree completely, but what would be some of the parts in what I just said about Levinas that Nietzsche would appreciate? Okay, Wilkes, go ahead.
He would like what Levinas says about not being like dependent on God, and like, you know, the shift in religion.
So very good. First point, let me say it, and then I'll get you guys the others, right? Remember, Nietzsche was saying, Christians, they just want a crutch, right? God is just their big delusion so they can feel better. They just want to create this God so they can be comforted, right? And Levinas is shifting now. He's saying, no, true religion is not about comfort. It's about responsibility, right? So it's a much more adult, mature view. It's not the childish, right? Delusional, sick mind, right? Which needs a father, which needs a comforter. Levinas is in a way shifting the religiosity to a much more mature, in a much more mature direction where it's no more about comforting. And I think Nietzsche, I agree with you, Wilkes, would be sensitive to this, right? So you guys make sure you write this down, right? The first thing that we can say to Nietzsche is that religion for Levinas is not about comfort, but about responsibility. Right, very good. I spelled everything wrong, I'm sorry. Okay, there's a couple more, which I saw. Williams, go ahead.
It's something like Jasmine, basically of you know, they create a reality that, you know, God is this and that, but Lavina is like out of that belief. So I feel like Nietzsche would agree with that.
Oh, very good. I didn't see that. I like that, right? Instead of now having this whole heavenly realm with God on the throne, Levinas is like, no, God is, we need to just look at reality, face reality, and find God in reality. And this is a move that Nietzsche would appreciate. I like that. Let's write this one down. Number 2, find God not outside of reality in some kind of fictitious universe, right? In a how do we spell fictitious? Universe, right? But right within reality, right? In the human beings around us, right? So I like that, right? We're not escaping, right? This is good, Williams, right? We are no more escaping. We are entering reality. In fact, let me add to what you said, right? Instead of escaping, we are becoming hypersensitive to reality, right? Let me just write this down. Instead of escaping, we are becoming hypersensitive to reality. We are entering reality through generosity, through being, right? Instead of escaping reality, we are now, for Levinas, to be truly spiritual, you need to develop a heightened awareness of the needs around you. It is in as much as you are aware of the need that you are able to connect to the trace of God. If you walk around not seeing, not hearing what is going on around you, how will you ever find, right, the trace of God, which is calling out to you from this places of wretchedness, right? So he's saying, actually, instead of escaping, we have to become even more engaged with reality. And that's how we find God. Very good, Williams. Any other? Those are the 2 I found. So if you find another one, I'm curious. Leon, go ahead.
Yeah, I remember back in the lecture when you were talking about Nietzsche, I hope I'm saying his name right, but about the imaginary psychologies, where I guess Christianity somewhat has a way of making us feel guilty, like a guilt trip, and correlating things to being sinful. Let's say we don't help somebody else.
Yeah.
I guess in this case, in today's lecture, where Lavina's approach was basically, is not really about necessarily about guilt, but rather about you want to take action to help one another, and you're seeing God not within yourself, but within the other person, which this time is on a different level.
Exactly, right? It's not about guilt, it's about compassion, right? Levinas is shifting. Instead of being full of shame and guilt, you're simply feeling compassion and acting upon it much more healthy, right? Than walking around, you know, feeling shameful and guilty without any way out, right? So absolutely, very nice. Let me add that, right? Instead, so 3rd point, right? We could say, instead of the inner guilt, right, and shame, we have this outwardly oriented compassion. Oops, I can't write compassion. Compassion and action, right? So very good. Yes, it, instead of this inner world, right? Christianity in a way sometimes is too turned upon itself, my sin, my guilt, my shame. Leave it as like, snap out of it. Snap out of it, look around you and respond, right? That's the idea. So yes, very nicely put, Leon. Anybody else? Good. Okay, good job. All right, so let us conclude. Let me stop the recording.